Hey there, thanks for stopping by my channel to color. If you're new here, consider subscribing. Don't forget to hit the little bell next to it so you'll be notified whenever I upload a new video. So today we're going to be working on this adorable Stampin' Bella image called Teeny Tiny Garden Girl Rose. Isn't she super cute? I love her. I'll go ahead and put a list of all the supplies I used down in the description box in case you would like to pick something up. Otherwise, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so for the skin, we're going to go ahead and use E11, E01, E00, and R20 for our cheeks. I'm going to go ahead and get started with E11 first. I'm going to use that for all my darkest shadowed areas. So I'm going to give it a quick swipe on her arm next to her dress there, and then I'm going to go along the bottom. I'm going to kind of go where her fingers are closing in on her hand, and then I'm going to try to do a little dab just along the bottom of her fingers. They're pretty small, so you might not accomplish that, but I left a little bit of white space there on the top. Then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for the other arm, a little dab right next to her dress, and then I'm going to go down and I'm just going to swipe over her entire finger because they're even smaller on this side than they are on the other side. So I decided it would just be quicker if I just gave it a quick swipe of the E11 and filled it all the way in. Then I'm going to go ahead and put that one away, and we're going to grab E01, and I'm going to use the E01 to fill in the rest of her arm. Her arms are pretty dinky, so I'm not going to bother with a bunch of technical blending on this. I'm just going to fill them in, and we're going to move on to the rest of her and get started. So I'll go ahead and do the same thing on this arm. I just went ahead and went over the entire arm. I filled it in the white space that was left, and I also went over the E11 to soften the edge of that line. I'm going to go ahead and grab my E11 again, and we're going to pop up here and we're going to work on her shoulders and her neck. So I'm going to go ahead and do a line on her dress that's right next to her dress on her arm. Then over the top of where the dress is hitting her arm there. And then a little bit on her shoulder because her head is tipped over that way, and I thought it would be a little more shadowed. I filled in her neck, and again, since this side is tipped over, I'm going to go ahead and fill in that neck area. And I'm going to go right along the edge of her dress with a small line so that we can get a little bit of shadow going from that. We'll go down the other side of her dress from her arm and then over the top of the dress there, so there's casting a shadow. Then we're going to go ahead and do E01 next. I take my E01 and I apply it just a little bit. I touch down on the E11 and I flick out towards the edge of her arm. I left a little bit of white space there at the top of her arm so that we can go ahead and add the E01 or E00 at the end. Same for her neck right there. I left just a little bit of white, just barely showing. Same for that side. We'll go ahead and go over the E11 and then fill in most of her arm, just leaving a little bit for E00. Now I'll take my E00 and I go ahead and I fill in those white areas, but I also use the pen to swipe over the rest of the area I colored, and this helps me to blend all the colors together and soften any lines that may have been left. Trick for me to at least get it a little bit more blended. Then we're going to go up here and we're going to do her face. So again, I grab E11 first, and on the left side she's got a little bit of her ear showing. So I'm going to go ahead and take my pen and just give it a quick little swipe at the bottom and a little bit up where her hair is touching. And then I'm going to go with a little line around some of these little curly cues she has for hair. I went around the little one that goes down the side, and this whole side I'm going to make hair. So I'm going to use the hair that's on the very edge to be my line. And then I went from her neck around to that line for the shadow on this side of her face. Then we're going to go ahead and grab E01. I'm going to give her ear a little dab of color. I left just a little small amount of white at the top to fill in, and then I'm going to connect my little line around the bottom of her face to the other side where I have my E11. And then from there, I flick from my E11 out into my white space, erasing some of that line and filling in some of my white area there. I also went around that little hair that was hanging down from her forehead. Then I'm going to go ahead and grab E00. I'm going to flick on top of my, fill in the ear of course, and then I'm going to flip on top of my E01 and I'm filling in most of her face. I left a little white line between her eyes that we'll fill in after we do her cheeks. Now we're going to grab R20. R20, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to put it underneath of her eye and then go under, kind of outwards away from there. So I start at the edge of her cheek and I flick from the edge of her cheek out underneath of her eye, causing her to have a little bit of a pink area. Same for this side. I start at the very edge of her cheek and then I swipe out, getting fatter as it goes underneath of her eye a little bit. Decided it needed to be a little bit darker on this side since it's tipped down, so I'm just giving that a second little swipe of color. Next, I'm going to go over it with my EO1. So EO1, I'm just going to go over her face, so I'm swiping down using the exact same area I applied it the first time. I'm swiping from the edge of her face into the middle, down from her bangs, and across from her side of her face there, right over the edge of that cheek. And our E00, and I am going to use that to fill in that white space and swipe over her entire face. So I'm just going to start up here, and I'm going to swipe across the entire thing, filling in that little white area that I left and also blending those harsh lines that I had going there. I'm going to go ahead, I decided her cheeks need to be a little bit pinker, so I'm going to grab my R20 again, and I'm just going to give them this side a third coat, and then I'll give a second coat to the other side to pinken them up just a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and just leave those like that. I'm not going to blend them because I thought they looked pretty good just like that. Okay, so now we're going to move on to her hair. For that, we're going to use E39, E35, E33, and E31. Start out by using my E31, and because she's got a bunch of leaves in her hair, I'm just going to color her entire hair area, just so I don't accidentally color any of those on with some of our darker browns. So I'm just going to go ahead and color in all of the background for her hair in. We can always come back later and add some more of that E31 afterwards if we think we're going to need it, but I thought it would just be easier to avoid all of those cute little leaves that she has in her hair. Even though we're going to color them green, I didn't want them all muddied up with the brown, so I'm just going ahead and coloring all the hair in now, and then I don't have to worry about that. Pretty careful on that little swirl on her forehead because it's kind of dinky, so you're going to need to use just the tip of your pen when you go in there to color that little space in. And be careful there not to color her ear, because I almost did. I'm going around the couple of leaves I have on this side, and then I'm just going to leave that part that. But can't you see all those leaves? They stand out really well now. Now I'm going to take my E39, which is the darkest color, and she's got kind of her curly squiggly hair, so I'm just going to take my pen and I'm going to kind of make some little squiggle marks, little half C's or half circles or little squiggly lines, whatever you want to do, and I try to keep them going in the direction that the hair is going. So you want to go whatever way the hair is going, like this way it's falling down towards her shoulder. I'm making sure my squiggles fall down towards her shoulder. They're not going sideways. So you want to make sure they're going the direction that the hair is growing. You can add as many squiggles as you want. I'm just going to add a few for now, and then I can always come back after I've applied the other colors and see if I need to add some little bit more. But I'm just going and adding some little squiggly lines on this side of her face too, and make sure to remember that they need to go in the direction that the hair is falling, not off to the side or vertical across your page. Adding a few more on this side since it's tipped down, I felt it would be a little bit darker. Then I'm going to go ahead and grab E35, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm just going to go ahead and add some squiggles in there, and I'm just kind of going in between where I put the E39. I have a few more colors combined in there. Hair has a bunch of different colors, so I'm just adding a few more squiggles in there to give it some character. Up here around the little leaves, I'm being really careful so I don't get those, but I'm adding some of those little half circles / C's that I do to make little curly hair girls, or hair that looks curly to me. I'm just filling in some more area there so we can get that covered up. And then I'm going to go with my E33, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm just going in between some of the last two colors and just adding another color on top. You can also go over some of the lines, it's not going to matter. I just need to add a few more squiggles in there so that she's got some really colorful streaks in her hair, and it just makes it pop. Careful going around your leaves, and then I'm adding a few down here on back and forth and making some curly things. Then I decided it was a little too light now, so I'm going to go ahead and grab my E39, and I'm just going to put a few of those little darker streaks back in just to make the color pop a little bit more. It's feeling a little faded out, and so I wanted it to be a little bit darker. So I'm just squiggling my pen around little curly cues and going down each side of her head, adding a few more here on the right hand side because it's tipped over and I thought it would again be darker on that side. Then I had to make sure to go back up and go between some of those leaves because some of the spaces I forgot. You could also go down and do the little squiggles that come off of her hair, but I decided to leave them plain, and so I'm just going to leave them just like that. Now we're going to work on leaves. So for that, we're going to use G28, YG17, and YG07. I'm going to go ahead and start with my G28. I'm not going to do anything fancy. I'm just going to start at the bottom of my leaf, and I'm going to give it 2 or 3 flicks up. I'm going to make sure that one of the flicks in the middle is longer than the other 2. So I got 2 short ones on each side and then a longer one in the middle where the little line is. We'll go over here, and there's a couple little leaves on the flower, so I'm going to go ahead and do those 2. Some of the leaves are smaller, so you may only need 1 or 2 flicks, just depending on the size of your leaf. The bigger ones I put 3 or 4, the medium ones I put 2 or 3, and the small ones I put just a little dab at the base of the leaf. And then for the rose here, I went ahead and I filled in the stem on the bottom of my rose with the G28, and I didn't want to mess with it later. And then I decided I better not forget to do the leaves in her hair after all that concentration on the hair up there. And again, I'm just giving it a long sweep in the middle and then a couple of shorter little strips of color on each side of that. Quick and easy, nothing too fancy. There's a little leaf there that was completely very small, so I went ahead and just pretty much filled it in. The others I'm just giving a couple of little quick swipes just to add some color at the base of my leaf. We're going to go ahead and we're going to grab YG17. I'm going to do the exact same thing I did with the G28. I'm just going to go over the G28 and I'm going to give it a couple of swipes towards the top. I'm not going to fill it all the way in because we're going to use our lightest color for that, but I'm just going over the top of my darkest color and sweeping past that into my white area just to soften the line a little bit and add a little bit more color to each one of these leaves. Some of them are small, so you may fill them all the way in, but I did try my hardest to leave a little bit of white on each one so that we could add our third color. We'll go down here and do the same thing to the leaves on the rose stem, just a couple of swipes. I tend to hold my pen a little bit more up and down when I'm doing these small areas because it helps me to stay a little bit better in the line. And we'll go ahead and put that away, and we'll grab YG07. For YG07, I'm going to go ahead and just color in all the white space at the top, and then I take my pen and I swipe over the entire leaf in a little circle so that we can fill the whole thing in. And by swiping over the whole thing, it'll help all that ink that's already on the paper blend together and soften the lines and make it look more natural. Hard lines waiting for you to come back to. Same thing up here in her hair. I'm just using my YG07 to swipe over each one of those leaves, blending all the color on the leaf together. Soft effect. I'm trying to be really careful because even though I'm going to cut the girl out, I don't want to go outside of the lines because that would make a little mess. Even though YG07, I'm pretty sure you could erase most of that, but we're just going to be careful. Then I'm going to take my G28 again, and I'm going to use that to just go over the line in the center of each one of the leaves. I don't care if it's on the line, I didn't care if it was longer than the line, I didn't care if it was shorter than the line. I'm just going back and defining that line a little bit more on each one of these leaves so they'll stand out and you'll notice it when you're looking at it. Quick and easy, don't stress over it, just give it a quick swipe of color in each one and be done with it. Are you enjoying the video? Give it a thumbs up. Don't forget, subscribe if you haven't already. We're going to go ahead and do the stripes on the socks. We're going to use C3 and C1, and then for alternate stripes, we're going to use Y26, YR23, and Y35. I'm going to go ahead and start with my C3, and I'm going to pick a stripe to start with. So let's start up here at the top, and I'm going to skip the first stripe, and I'm going to do the one right next to it. So I'm going to start at the flower petal, and I'm going to swipe up about 1/3 of the way on the stripe with my C3. And then I'm going to skip one, and I'm going to do the next one over. Nothing fancy, just make sure to skip one and just give it a quick little swipe about 1/3 of the way or 1/4 of the way, whichever you want. I want the top of the stripe to be white when I get done, so I'm making sure that I don't take up too much space, but about 1/3 is perfect. Then we're going to pop down here and we're going to do her legs. So you want to pick a stripe to start with, and I decided I would go ahead and start the gray at the top of her leg. So I'm going to go from the outside of her leg with my C3 And again, about a third of the way in on her leg, I'm just giving a quick little swipe. You can also just do a little line if that's a little bit easier for you. Just go down the inside of her leg there with a line of color and be done with it. Nothing fancy, just a quick little swipe of your color. And we're going to leave the edges of these white also, like we did at the top. When we get up there, we're going to leave a little bit of white, and that will make it look really pretty. Same for this sock. We're going to go up here and we're going to pick one. So I'm going to go ahead and go start at the top and then skip every other one and go down until we get to the bottom of her shoe. Then we'll go down here, but since that one has a gray one right next to it, I went ahead and skipped that one and went with the next one. And I'm continuing with my shadow on the same side of her leg. So I'm going from the outside of her leg towards the inside. I thought since her leg was tipped back, her leg would kind of be angled out more underneath of her skirt on the outside, so it would have more light on it. Then we'll go ahead and grab C1. C1 we're going to go ahead and take and we're going to swipe over the top of C3. I go ahead and start right at the base of C3 and I swipe over that and I leave a little bit of white at the edge of her socks. So I'm not filling it all the way in, but I'm making sure to go over the C3 and definitely over the line of the edge so that it will soften that and you won't even notice it when it dries and you're all done. We're just going to work our way up to the top. I'm making sure that I don't go out of the lines, even though C1 you could erase pretty easily, but I'm trying to be careful. Since these are pretty small stripes, if you tip your pin up a little bit more so it's more up and down, it will be much easier to stay in that line. I filled in that top stripe because it's underneath of the flower and I thought it would be completely shadowed. And then I'm just working my way back down her leg to the... Again, I'm leaving the edge of that stripe on the outside white. And I'm going to leave it that way at the end. I'll go up here and we'll do her top two. So same thing, we're just going to start at the bottom of C3. We're going to swipe over that and it go about 2/3 of the way up the stripe. And then it will be, that's how far we're going to fill it in. We're not going to fill it the rest of the way. If you're worried that there's a line there, you could always take your colorless blender and give it a quick swipe over the edge and it will take care of that. So now we'll move on to yellow. So we're going to start with our Y26 and we're going to do the same thing we did with C3. We're just going to go with the alternate stripes. So I'm going to swipe up on each one of these little stripes on her dress top there about 1/3 of the way. Some of them are pretty small, so you want to be really careful. Then we're going to do the same thing for our socks down here. So I'm just starting out on the outside because I want my shadows to be on the outside of her legs, and I'm just giving them a quick swipe on the edges. Nothing fancy, just a quick swipe. Work our way clear down to her shoe. Some of them are a little bit smaller, so I tried to use a little bit less than I did on some of them, so you just kind of be careful there. And pay attention when you're doing your alternate stripes, because I almost colored the gray stripe there. Then I'm working my way up to the top, and we'll get up here, and there's just a tiny dab there, and then we're going to give that one a swipe, and a little bit to that one. And then we're going to put that away, and we'll grab YR23. Just like we did with our C1, we're going to take YR23 and we're going to swipe over the Y26 and we're going to go out about 2/3 of the way, and I'm going to leave a little bit of white at the edge so that we can go fill it in with our lightest color. But I always start from the back of the color, so I'm starting at the very edge of Y26, swiping over the top of that and going right out there towards the edge. I'll come back this way. Those ones at the top are behind the other one, so I went ahead and filled those all the way in since they're so close to the top, and I didn't want to have to worry about them anymore. Work our way down to our shoe, leaving that outside edge white again, so we can do that later. And then we'll go up here and we'll do the same thing to the top of her dress. So I'm swiping over from the bottom of Y26 and I'm going about 2/3 of the way up the stripe, and I'm leaving the top third white so we can fill that in with our lightest color. These over here get pretty skinny, so be careful when you're coloring those. And we'll go ahead and we'll grab Y35. Y35, we're just going to swipe over the entire stripe. So I'm going to start at the bottom, swipe over Y26, YR23, clear to the top. This will help soften both of those lines that were left and mingle all the colors together. I decided not to leave the white at the top of the yellow stripe because I thought it would look a little, I just didn't like how it looked, so we're just coloring it all the way in. Same for the stripes on the stalk down here. We're just going to swipe over the last two colors and bring it out to the edge so that we color the stripe all the way in. Quick and easy, nothing fancy. Although when you get down here, that ankle's pretty small, so be careful. Even though I filled those in, I went ahead and swiped over them just to soften them up a little bit. Okay guys, we're going to move on to the dress and the flower. For that, you are going to use G16, BG15, BG34, BG32, and BG11. So I'm going to go ahead and start on the flower with G16. I'm going to use this at the base of the flower and just give it a couple of little flicks like I did on the leaf. So let's start on this middle, the one on the inside. So I'm going to give it a shorter flick, and then I'm going to give it a longer flick on the side that's closest to the dress. Since it's tipped over, I thought it'd be a little bit more shadowed there. And then we'll give it a longer flick in the middle of that petal, and then a couple of shorter flicks on the sides. Same for that petal. Then we're going to go ahead and grab BG15, and I'm going to go right over the top of my G16 because I want it, the BG15 is a lot more blue than the G16 was, so I'm just adding that onto the top. Then I'm taking up about 3/4 of my flower there. Then I'm going to go ahead and grab BG34. BG34, I'm going to go ahead and flick right from the bottom, and I'm just going to swipe up, and since the flower, let's go pretty close to the top. We're taking up most of the rest of the flower, but we're going to leave a little bit for our BG32. So I'm going to go ahead and fill the rest of my flower in with that. Swipe over the entire flower with BG32 just to soften it all. So I'm just giving it a quick swipe over the entire thing. I'm going to go ahead and grab our G16 again, and I'm going to darken up those little slashes that I put at the bottom of the flower to begin with. So I'm just giving it a swipe with my color just to add it back in. Then we're going to use this on our dress. So let's go ahead and start on the little petals that are underneath. So I'm going to go ahead and add this wherever I want there to be a shadow. So down here I'm going to go underneath the petals towards the back and then down her leg, and then we're going to go around the other side, and again we're going to go on the underneath side of the petal and down her leg. Here we're going underneath that petal, and then we're going on the outside of the petal, so it's underneath on the bottom petal, around all those petals, and then down her leg. Then we're going to go ahead, I'm trying to decide how many petals I want to do. I don't want to do all the petals at once because they tend to dry, so I'm going to do all the petals that are underneath first, and then we'll do some of the bigger petals on the top next. So again, I'm going on the underneath petal, adding that in the shadow area. Go down next to her leg, and then up here, this one's kind of underneath, so we're doing underneath on this one, and you want to make sure that go on the underneath side, not the petals that are on top. And then I went down the edge. This one is underneath too, so we're going to go down the edge of that, and then underneath the petals here on the side, and then down next to her leg. This one here is underneath too, so I'm going to go right next. The one on top of it looks like it's folded up, so I'm just going underneath of that little section, and then this one curves over, so I went ahead and just dabbed that in there, even though I'm not working on that petal yet. And then I didn't like how pointy it was, so I'm just going to give this middle little area a little couple of swipes there at the top, so it has more of a curved outline there at the top. Then we'll go ahead and grab our BG15, and I'm going to go over the top of my G16, widening out those lines and just bringing it a tiny dab past into my white space. I don't want to take up too much area, but I want to make this a little bit more blue, so I'm going right over the top of it and then pulling out into my white just a little bit. Down here and do the ones in the back. Trying not to get too much on here. Some of the petals, when they're a little bit bigger, see, like this one's a little bit larger, so I went ahead and I brought that color out a little bit more because it's not going to use up the entire petal by putting it on there. And then up here, these are smaller, so I'm going right over the top of my G16 and I'm pulling it out a little bit. Some of the petals have those big little bumps in there, so I made sure to bring my ink out into the little bumps a little bit more. Here we're going to soften that edge. Then again, just like I did with the G16, I'm going to pull it down away from that little pointy spot at the top and make it more of a half C or a circle feel to it. Then we're going to go ahead and grab BG34. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to go right over the top of our last two colors, and we're going to fill in some of our white area. Some of the petals, like this one, was pretty small, so I just finished filling it in. Some of them will have a little bit of white just on the edges. I'm just trying to be careful to leave a little bit of white space on the edge of some of these. So we can add one more color. Going around the edges of this one, leaving a little bit of white space, and down behind her leg. And I'm bringing this one out a little bit further because the petal is fatter, so I want to use up a little bit more of that space. That one took hardly any of a dab. A little bit on this line, but I still have some white. Bring this one down just a little bit. I'm barely going over the edge of that line just to soften it a little bit. Go ahead and add some of this. This one we want to pull down a little bit more because it's got quite a bit of leftover white area there. So I'm going ahead and I'm just swiping over that and filling it in a little bit. Next, we're going to go ahead and grab BG32. So again, some of the petals we're going to fill in the rest of the way because there's not much left. So we're going right along. This is a case there where I'm going to fill it in. So I'm just swiping over the entire petal to fill it the rest of the way in, and that will soften all those colors together. Same for those. I'm just going to swipe right over the top of them, and that will save trying to stain the lines and all of that. And just go right around the edges and then swipe right over the top of it to blend everything together. Go ahead and fill this one that's underneath in. Then for this one up here, I'm not going to fill it in all the way because I want to put a little bit of my BG11 in there. So I'm just going along the outline of the edge, and then I'll swipe over the back section to soften that edge up a little bit. Then we'll take our BG11, and any of the spaces you have white, you're going to go ahead and fill those in. So I'm just swiping over that edge, and then I'm going to use my pen to go over all of that color just to soften the edges of all of the lines that were left on that petal. I'm going to go ahead and work on the back petal. So again, grab your G16, and you're going to add this wherever you want shadows. So I'm going to go along my flower, and I'm going to add shadows underneath where it's close to another petal. Right next to this one, it's underneath. I'm trying to be careful to not get it on the edges of the petal that's on top, because we want that to be the lightest part, and because it's out in the sun a little bit more. So I'm being very careful to keep it on the outside of my lines there. Here I felt that would be more in the dark, so I went ahead and filled in a little bit of that V so that it wouldn't be quite so far up in there. And I'm going along the outside of that petal just to darken it, and then I'm coming down from that and going around to the bottom. These right here on the inside are going to be darker, so I'm definitely going to get those. This one up here's got a little crease in it, so I filled in the crease, and then I'm bringing it around to where it curves back up. Then I'm going to go over the top of that line. Same thing, I'm going to go right over the curve, and then I'm going to go where it starts to curve up, and then I'm going to stop. Then this top petal up here has got a little bit where it looks like it's touching, so I'm going very carefully with just the tip of my pen, trying to make a really small line because it's kind of dinky up there. And then we'll bring it around and go out away from here because it's kind of in a little crease right there. So I went ahead and filled it in a little bit more on the little crease. Come down the outside of this petal, around underneath these petals. And then because these petals are behind everything else, I'm going to go ahead and go over those. And then you want to go on the back side of the petals that are flipped up. Across the top, and got some shadows where it looks like they're flipped up. Both sides. You can also go down the crease where the flowers are touching, but I completely forgot about that, so I didn't do that. I think I do it when I come back. Okay, so we're going to go ahead now, and we're going to grab our BG15. For For BG15, remember we're going to go right over the top of our G16 and we're just going to make our lines a little bit fatter. So I'm just completely going over the top of the G16 and I'm pulling it out just a tiny dab further so that it will make it a nice pretty blue rather than that darker green. I think it goes really well with the entire flower having it painted over the top of another color. I'm just working my way around. So we're going to go over this line here. And these petals, since they're kind of in between petals, they're going to be darker in there. And there, see, I decided I forgot to do my G16 on the petal, so I went ahead and just started this one so that we can darken it up a little bit. Be very careful up there at the top because it's not a very big space. And then we're going to bring this around and out, and I'm kind of filling in a little bit more of that shadowed area so it's not got quite such a big petal area left over. Same for this one, we're going to go ahead and brush on that G16, but we're also going to pull it a little bit further away from our line than we did the previous petals because this petal is very big, so I wanted to take up some more space. Same with this one. I didn't do a very tiny dab of a line on this. I'm just pulling away from that line and adding a little bit more ink on there so that it will take up more of the space on my petal. Okay, so then we're going to go ahead and add our BG34. So I'm going over the two previous colors. I'm pulling out some of them, like this one. I'm just going to leave a white edge so I can go in with another color because it's getting pretty filled up. Same for this one. It's pretty filled up, so we're just going to add a little bit of this color to take up a little bit more of that space, but leaving the edges of the petals white so that we can come back with a lighter color and give them a highlight. This one I'm pulling in, since the petal's a little bit bigger, I'm going ahead and putting in that little bump. Then I'm going to fill in these because they are in the back. I went ahead and just swiped over the entire petal and filled it the rest of the way in. That'll really, since it's darker back there, will make those petals that are folded up in front of it pop out a lot more. Here we're going over the two previous colors and I'm just taking up a little bit more of my space. I made that line there in the middle that went up to go up because the petal it's on is quite big. It sticks up quite a way, so I wanted to give that a little bit more color. These were taking up a little bit more space there, and this one's really big, so we're going to come and swipe out here quite a bit. We want to take up some of that white area with this BG34. Okay, and then these petals that are flipped up, I'm going to go ahead and go with a small line across the bottom of each of these just so we can start some shadows where it would look like it was turning. And I'm kind of making my line have little bumps in it so it matches the petal shapes that are above it. So like that one's got a little bump. I'm making sure that it's not straight. I'm just giving it a little bit of color and the shape matches the flower that it's on. We'll go ahead and grab BG32. Go ahead and fill some of these in. This one's pretty sparse, so we're going to go ahead and get the rest of that one. And make sure to swipe over the rest of the leaf too so it'll soften that. This one's a little bit bigger, so I was able to leave a little bit of white space for our BG11. Same for this one. We're just going to swipe over some of that space, leaving some white at the edges. Working our way around the entire thing, creating some of those bumps on there. You always want to make sure to put the little bumps in there. That gives it some character. Same for this one. It's got a few little bumps on there, so I'm going over and around and creating some of those bumps in there. And then there's a few lines back there, so I went ahead and swiped over that area with my pen to soften those lines that were on there. Add a little bit to this one. Remember, this one goes up quite a way, so I went ahead and bumped that color up to go with it. I'm going to go ahead with our BG11. I'm going to go ahead and fill in the rest of my flower. So I'm just carefully going up here around the edges and filling it in. I want to go out of the lines, and then I quickly give it a swipe over the petal just to lay down some ink and soften it up. Work our way down to the bottom. That one got a little bit easier because it's in between everything, so I didn't have to be as careful. It was much easier to just swipe over the flower and fill it the rest of the way in. These on the edge take a little bit more because you don't want to get it outside the lines. Here we'll fill this in up here, going all the way to the top. Side. And then I'm going to take my BG11 and I'm going to swipe over my flower with the pen just to soften everything up and get some of those harsh lines out. So I'm just swiping back and forth across the entire image, and it softens everything nicely. It's out exposed the most. I'm going to give that a little bit more. I'm going to swipe it one more time. Look how nicely that's softening up. This one's pretty big too, so let's go ahead and give that one another swipe real quick. Okay, then I'm going to come back with my G16 and I'm going to add some of those shadow areas back in. So I'm just going to go where I previously applied it, and I'm just going to go with my pen and add those back in. I'm trying to keep my pen more tipped up on straight up and down so I can make a really small line. I don't want it to be too stand outish, but I want to be able to define each one of these petals, so I'm just going back over my previous line so that we can make it really stand out, make those flower petals pop. Down in that shadow there where they've got a little crease, make sure to give that a little dab extra so that you have it like it has a wrinkle in the flower there. We're going to work our way underneath of her dress here. Go down this way. I'm being careful. I was really careful when I went next to the socks that I didn't get any on there, because if you do, you're not going to get that off. It's pretty dark. Then we'll go up here, and remember in that little V, I gave it an extra little slash of color so that it would bring it down so it didn't have quite such a little point on there. Same for this little crease up here. I'm going to make sure to give that an extra little bit. This one's underneath, so I'm just going over that line, softening the edges of the flower. And we'll go down the edges and over the top of this petal that's turned up. And here I'm going to come back, since I forgot it the first time, I was able to add my G16 where I should have put it, where that petal was folded over the top of the other petal. So see, everything's fixable. You just can go back and add a little bit extra. Even though I forgot it the first time, and I do that quite a bit, I forget things and then I come back later and add it over where I should have had it the first time. There's our little extra in that little V there and around to the corner. Then I decided that some of those creases needed to be a little bit darker, so I grabbed W4 and I'm going to use that to add even more shadows. So like some of those areas that are in the back, so this one I'm giving it a little flick of color along that line for the back. This one had that deep shadow where it had the little V, we added extra. Here's a little crease in there where it's kind of curved around and you can see the back. That wonderful little fold right here, we're going to add a little dab in there. And then I'm just kind of picking places where I want to add a little bit more shadows. I'm not going to do all of them, but I'm just going in and adding a few little spaces where I think it needs to be shadowed a little bit more. You could totally leave this part out if you wanted. I just thought it darkened it up and gave it a lot more contrast by putting this in there on some of the petals and leaving some the way they were. Alright, so now we're going to add some sparkle. You know, I can't live without my sparkle. So I've got my Spica clear glitter pen, and I'm going to go ahead and add it to my leaves and the little stem on my rose there. You could just do a couple little slashes, and then I decided I was going to go ahead and add some to my flower, so I just gave it a couple of quick little swips of ink on there. And then she's got this cute little leaf bracelet on, so I added some sparkle to that. and then a little swirly thing, of course. And then you cannot have sparkle not on her hair. So I went ahead and add some sparkle to each one of those little swirls in her hair. And then I just kind of squiggled my pin around up there in her hair. I wasn't making any kind of deciding factors. I just kind of squiggled it around in there. It's not so pronounced that it's going to make a big difference, but it does add a little bit of sparkles on each one of those little swirls and just kind of sparkles up her hair. Then for the leaves, I went ahead and just gave them a couple little lines of sparkle just to give them a little bit of something extra there too. Nothing fancy, but it does add just a little bit of something. You can't see it on the film, but it does add a little bit of sparkle when you move the card around. Then I'm going to go ahead and grab my Sakura black glaze pen, and I'm just going to dot that on her eyes. And what this does is it's kind of it's a glaze, so it adds a little dot on there that's kind of raised up a little bit, and it's shiny, so it just adds a little bit of something extra to her eyes there. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to put our card together. So through the magic of video editing, I went ahead and I cut my girl out. You can get this, I think Stampin' Bella has a die that you can use with this stamp to cut her out, but I didn't have that, so I just went ahead and fussy cut around the outside, leaving a little bit of a white border on the outside. On there. And then the sentiment there, you could, the card kit features this sentiment. Is going to come in the card kit already stamped for you. It's from a Stampin' Bella image or stamp set, so I'll go ahead and put that down in the description too if you want to do that. If you hate the sentiment, you can always flip it over and use the back, or you can trace it and then cut out a new one and use that. And this time, this mini monarch border, I had a few of those left over, so I went ahead and I put it in the card kit, so you're going to get it with your card kit this time. Yours are going to come with the reverse side on it, so you'll just need to pull that off, and you can either keep it and use it for another project or throw it away. And then sometimes the borders aren't all the way even, so I went ahead and checked to make sure that my card was going the direction I wanted it to. And then here I'm just going along the edges. There's a little bit of fiber still on there, so I'm just using my fingernail to kind of scrape it and wiping it a couple of times so that all the little stray pieces of cardstock fall off of it, and I'm not worried about it later. It's easier to do it now than do it later. Just give it a quick flick, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to adhere those to the yellow piece. So I'm going to grab that yellow piece, I'm going to put a quick swipe of tape across the top. Of course, I tape the desk. That's the way I do things around here. And then I'm going to flip it, and I'm going to line up one end, and then I'm just going to stick it down. This way, in case it sticks out of the side, you can trim it off. This makes it nice and easy before you get it all together. Same thing for this side. I'm going to give the back a quick swipe of my tape, and then I'm going to put it onto my little mini monarch border there. And again, I just lined up one side, I made sure it was straight, and then I just stuck it down on top of that. I noticed the one side there had a little bit that was just sticking out there, so now I could trim it if I wanted, but it was so minuscule that I decided it would be fine. So I'm going to go ahead and line this up here. And this works out too if you do it first, so if this piece happens to be a little bit bigger, then you can trim the whole thing before you put it on the front of your cardstock. So I'm going to apply some adhesive to the back of this. Quick swipe of tape here. Go ahead and kind of center it in the middle of this light teal piece. You could use the green side too if you wanted and then change the color of your flower, but I'm going to use this side because that's the colors I made to match the flower on her dress. And then I'm going to stick it down. Like I said, if it was sticking out, now is your chance to trim the whole thing before you stick it on your cardstock. Because I left hardly any border on this piece. There's only like 1/8 of an inch border on around this piece compared to the cardstock base, that you could trim 1/4 of an inch off and still have a border on it, and it would look really pretty. So when you're putting it on there, you want to make sure to be a little bit careful. I just kind of picked 1/8 of an inch from the top and made sure it was straight, and then I'm just going to stick it straight down on there. Tap. Then we're going to go ahead and get our girl here, and I have some foam dots that I've used all the dots up, and there's just the edge left over, and I always keep these because they're perfect for using for these little sections, like on her leg. They're pretty skinny, so I'm just going to use one of those little quick sections to stick it on there, and I don't have to worry about anything else. And then I went ahead and I cut some foam tape off of the huge roll I have, and I'm just going to put that on there. A little bit smaller one for behind her head. You could put some behind the flower, but I didn't bother with that. I'm just going to go with those 3 pieces and pop her up off the front of my card. Peel off the backing on here. Of course, her legs are pretty flimsy, so you want to hold on to them a little bit while you're trying to get the backing of your foam tape off. And then her, you want to make sure she's on her card, so make sure that she's not sticking off the side. And then I'm going to make her so she's walking along the edge of that teal piece. Then I'm going to give her a quick pat and stick her down. We're going to go ahead and grab our sentiment, and I'm going to also pop that up. So I'm going to grab another piece of foam tape and stick that on the back. And if you didn't like the sentiment and you wanted to use the back, you could always put the girl on the other side and then just stick the sentiment on the other side of the card. We're going to stick that up towards the top. And then we had I threw in a couple of these little hearts on there. And for the little hearts, you could also do, after you get them attached, you could take and put some glossy accents on there so they're nice and shiny. That's what I did on the original card. And of course I forgot my liquid glue, so I'm just using my tape runner here to stick those down. This is not the optimum way. I don't like doing it that way, but I didn't want to have to run clear to the other room to get the glue, so I'm just using this in a pinch. But after you get them on there, you can put your glossy accents on there, and it kind of makes them look like enamel dots. You put it on there, and then you have to let it dry for a bit, so probably overnight, and then that would be perfect. But there we go. You have your beautiful card you can send to a friend who has friends or flowers in the garden of life. Alright guys, so that's going to do it for our coloring today. I hope you had fun. If you have a question, leave me a comment down below and I'll make sure to get back to you. If you'd like to see more close-up photos and details of this card project, head over to the store blog and I'll put a link down in the description box. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and hit the little bell next to it so you'll be notified whenever I upload a new video. Right about now, you should be seeing a screen that shows you a couple more videos I thought you might be interested in. If you are, just click on either of those and it will take you straight there and you can check it out. Otherwise, I hope you're having a fabulous day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!